Happy Tuesday, everybody. I know it's 12:02 and I've gotten a couple of messages that folks are running a little bit late and are going to be jumping on, but to be mindful of time. I know everyone is busy. I know Molly, you have to bolt at some point too. But I want to welcome everyone to this space as we're going to share a little bit about our experience last week in Boston as we were at the Relationship Centered Schools Summit. Some educational partners are on the call with me today, and I'm excited about that. And so kind of think of this as a quick road trip, if you will. We're kind of a group in maybe a road trip in a compact car. But I'm excited to share about the Relationship Centered School Summit. And again, have a bit of a lead foot when it comes to talking about this. I'm really passionate about education and supporting young people. So buckle up. Um, but we only have really one car rule, I guess, and that's that we all have a story to share. And so that we respect ourselves and respect everyone on the call, but lean in, share, ask questions. This is an informal space to really grow and learn from each other as well. And really, the goal of today is to have you be able to walk away with some food for thought. Clever little play on words there with the lunch and learn, but we really hope too that we can provide you with some really great resources that were shared with us at the summit that you can walk away with and bring back to your school or your educational organization or your workplace that you can share with your teams. So again, this is really an invite, an opportunity for all of us to get in the game when it comes to supporting young people. So we're excited and again, happy to have you here. Just to kind of ground us, I just wanted to mention, and a few of you have been on calls with me before, but recently the CDC did a study in asking young people about their supportive relationships that they have at school. And there's really compelling data that came from that as to why we're in this space and why this work matters. And when high school students from across the United States were asked, do you have a supportive peer relationship or a supportive caring adult at school? For those that answered yes, they reported half the mental health challenges than those that did not have a supportive relationship, half. So it's noted that there are rare, if any, interventions and or tools that offer the same results, really cutting mental health challenges that are facing our young people right now. Again, relationships can and do serve as a connecting force that changes outcomes for kids. And again, there's not a whole lot of things that can do that, but this one we know for sure. So again, most of you on the call would say relationship-centered schools. Yeah, totally. I'm in. I believe in relationships, right? But this is deeper. This is really the work of embedding relationships in everything, into culture, into the way that you feel when you walk into a school building, the way that you feel when you walk into a workplace. So really, it's embedding relationships in the fabric of how we operate, of how we work with young people, and how we support young people. So again, I kind of encourage you now to kind of think about that and think about your own experiences, your own journey. So in the chat, if you would be so kind as to share your name and pronouns, your organization, agency, or program that you're joining us with, and then who supported you along your education journey through school. And one of our colleagues out at the summit actually shared that he didn't have a supportive person. So if that might be the case for you, who do you wish would have maybe been there to help provide you with some support along your education journey? And as you share, I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. I'm Emily Garai, she, her. I'm the program director at Mentor Minnesota. Today I'm joined by Ali Irvig, our incredible marketing and development manager, who's not feeling well, but she's rallying to be here with me today. But with that, I come from an education background. So again, hence the lead foot on really being excited to talk about this work. I worked in education for almost 20 years, both in special education and then K-12 with behavior interventions. But now on this team with Mentor Minnesota, alongside Allie and Sarah, our executive director, who couldn't be with us today, this work continues for me, that we are continuing to show young people support, and also uplift and support the adults that work with them in this space, because we really want to ensure that young people have agency and supportive relationships, if that's out in their communities, if that's in education, or out in the workplaces. And I will really share quickly, looking back, I think I was fortunate enough to have several people in my life that have supported me and continue to support me. But one that stands out when I was in school was my FFA advisor, Mr. Erickson. Mr. Erickson, and again, I grew up on the White Earth Indian Reservation. I'm Anishinaabe Ojibwe. And sometimes when people think of agriculture, it gets to be a whole complicated intersection. But Mr. Erickson really saw something in me that I maybe didn't see in myself and encouraged me to lead. Granted, he encouraged me to lead in judging dairy cattle, and I happened to actually be pretty good at that. Didn't grow up on a farm, but again, really what he taught me was that to not be afraid of doing something different, to not be afraid of doing something that was maybe scary or hard, that I could, push myself. And in doing that, I would learn and grow as a person. So again, just these people that maybe came in or out of your life, that supported you along the way. So I encourage you to keep sharing in the chat. Again, just someone who maybe helps support you along the way. I'm also excited. I know Jen is maybe running a little bit late, but I know that Molly, while you're here, I'm going to quickly make sure I capture you as long as you're with us. But when we went out to Boston last week for the Relationship Centered School Summit, I was joined, and really felt honored that Minnesota represented. I was joined by some incredible people who again are on the call. Odia Wood Kruger, who's on the call, is an educational consultant at Wood Kruger Initiatives LLC, and also a public school advocate. I also want to share that Odia is an author and principal investigator of a new research report called Restoring Our Place, commissioned by the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, and as a part of the Understand Native Minnesota campaign, which really is looking at Native resources that are helpful to educators and what materials are still desperately needed. She also worked for Minneapolis Public Schools for many years, so I'm excited she's here. Molly Lindquist, who's also on the call, is the teacher and a Q-Comp instructional coach at St. Michael Albertville School District. Molly's a natural relationship building educator who's always made lots of time for fun in her classroom, and really supporting her fellow teachers as well, myself included. And really was excited that she could be at this, because I do think both Odia and Molly, at the heart of their work, is really advocating for both educators, teachers, as well as students feel supported and included in school. And Jen, who's not on the call yet, Jen is the Executive Director of Student Supports and Engagement at Mounds View School District. So we can allow her to introduce herself if she's able to jump on. But with that, I'd love to maybe start with you, Molly, since I know you'll have to go, but I'd love for you to share quickly, maybe if you wouldn't mind, a little bit, maybe one big takeaway that you got from the summit, and or if you wanted to share a little bit about who supported you along your journey.
Of course, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Yeah, I do have to scoot out in a little bit for an observation that got rescheduled. So, yeah, I would say my biggest takeaway from the conference was just really having that student voice being included in these decisions that we're making. It's kind of like it was a no-brainer, but I think it's something that consistently gets left out. Is we're talking about kids and what's best for kids and all these things that we want to do, but so often their voice is missing in that, and what they truly maybe need or would want, or what they find beneficial. So that was just a good thing to take back, especially the district I'm in. I had mentioned, I mean, probably every district is very student focused, but I just don't feel like they have that opportunity to share that. So looking forward to connecting with the administration here and our district staff to just kind of see what we can do with Mentor. And then, yeah, one of my favorite teachers, a high school teacher, I wasn't really thinking about secondary education. When I was in high school, nobody in my family had went to anything beyond high school. So I just wasn't really thinking about it, but he really encouraged me to think about college and think about getting into education and staying involved with young people. So I'm glad he did.
Awesome. How about you, Medea?
Say, folks, hello. So one of the big things I took away from the summit was listening to folks talk about how when the pandemic rolled out, we were really, we're all kind of running around with our hair on fire, thinking about all the things we could do to make education better suited for our students. And now that things are starting to settle down and become a little more normal, we're slowly cutting away those things that we were doing, the extra supports, the differentiated learning, the online learning opportunities, things like that. And that really, that saddened me because I really felt like we had an opportunity to change the nature of education in the United States, and we're sliding back to where we were. And none of us were happy in that first place. And now we're not that we were happy during the pandemic either, don't get me wrong, but I felt like in some ways there was some controlled chaos that we were creating the story that we really wanted. And I feel like we're getting sucked back into the old. And that was something that really resonated with me. Regarding connections that were really important to me. So I grew up in Saskatchewan, Canada. I'm now a dual citizen, but when I was in high school, I joined an outdoor education group. And so I'd never gone camping. My family has a cabin. So like I didn't have to go camping, right? We had a place at the lake. And so I joined this outdoor ed trip and went camping for the first time. And it was kind of miserable. Like May in Saskatchewan, probably not much different than May in northern Saskatchewan. And I remember being really cold and not sleeping well and thinking, what am I doing? But I ended up sticking it out through almost all my years of through high school. And we would do these canoe trips in northern Saskatchewan. And the teachers that I got to build connections with were just so much more authentic and wonderful. And I absolutely adored getting to know them on a deeper level. And they just became my advocates and my mentors. And I really appreciated them.
That's awesome. That whole experiential learning. I think Odia and I both are firm believers, I think, in getting out and really trying to embed and incorporate some of those experiences for young people because I do think that they're so powerful. The other part too is that if you're not having fun, right, you're not learning. We were kind of sharing some messages the other day, but I think sometimes even people that have come in our lives, if they've allowed us to have some fun and we can have fun together, we're learning and we're growing as humans. And so I think that's really important too. So, or maybe even if it's laughing at something you're not too thrilled about doing, but if you can laugh together, I think that's really impactful too. But hi, Jen. So Jen Lodine from Mounds View School just jumped on too, and Molly just had to bounce out. I know folks are super busy today. I think the week after coming back from MEA, folks are trying to multitask as best they can, but we're happy you're here, Jen. And yeah, I'm going to give you the mic here in a second, but I do want to mention, sort of as we're talking about this, really when we're talking about relationship-centered schools, there's a couple big components of it, and one of them being the mentoring mindset. And really, Mentor Minnesota, along with all the mentor affiliates, Mentor National, most and if not all the work we, really invest ourselves in is the mentoring mindset. And how can we infuse systems like education with the mentoring mindset, workplaces with the mentoring mindset, all of that. And really, there's four big cornerstone pieces or four big components of the mentoring mindset. And I'm sharing this because I do think that it helps to kind of ground us in what we're going to be talking about and as we kind of dive into the takeaways from the summit. And that's these 4 pieces. The first one being developmental. So change, that's meaning that relationship changes and grows over time. So really, like any relationship, it takes time to build trust. And we're in a space now where I believe, in a relationship deficit in education. And so it's really critical that we are allowing young people to trust us again. I know that was a part of the conversation we had last week, and that being a really big one, that again, young people are in a space of um, unsure of really what the schools or different spaces are when it comes to that trust component. So kind of thinking about that. But again, the idea here with development is that we as adults are to act as a bridge, right? We're being that connecting piece during different transitions for young people. So that might be practicing goal setting, viewing that young person through strengths-based, uplifting their talents, interests, and providing them opportunities to learn, to grow, and essentially to lead, and then, working with their peers. The second component is intentional. So I see you, I hear you, I value you. And that's really prioritizing that young person's needs, the youth's needs. So having a positive and respectful view of that young person and their families. Again, young people are coming to us from all different walks of life, different home situations, different circumstances at home. But again, being really intentional into understanding those intersectionalities. But still, I hear you, or I see you, I hear you, and I value you. The third one being supportive. So being in their corner in a really non-judgmental and an empathetic way. So really trying to put yourself in their shoes. And the last one, communal. So the village concept. So we're in this together, right? I believe it was Sadiq at the summit. One of our affiliates on the East Coast shared an African proverb and said, if you want to move fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's really this concept, is that mentorship and the mentoring relationship is one piece of a young person's life. It's not the end all be all for all of these different things. Education isn't all for young people, but it is a strong and important piece in that of the bigger system, but really looking at the community and how can we intersect our circles of being supportive for young people. So I just kind of wanted to ground us in that, because you'll hear us talk about a mentoring mindset off and on. And some other quotes, I know I just shared one from Sadiq, who quoted a proverb, but these were some guiding quotes from the summit, and really just wanted to call on the partners on the call to lean into some of these, and really, what were your takeaways or thoughts, or how did it make you feel when you heard this? But the first one being, kids will value school when they feel the school values them. So maybe Jen, I know you just jumped on, but maybe if you wanted to quick introduce yourself and then lean into that quote.
You bet. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was a little bit late. So Jen Lodine, Executive Director of Student Support and Engagement for Mounds View Public Schools. And I really appreciate the partnership that Emily and others and I got to engage in as far as this work last week. So for me, one of the big takeaways that I had was recognizing that it is about relationship-centered schools, but it's also about relationship-centered communities, and that schools aren't in it alone, that there's lots of partners who can really help us to really engage in that healthy developmental relationship with students, which we know is a mitigating factor when we think about those risk factors and how we want to add more protective factors for students. That relationship is the key. So yeah, I would say those are some of the takeaways. And we just, we talk a lot about centering student voice or centering community voice with our parents and caregivers too, but I think we've really got to define what that is when we talk about centering and having students be seen and valued. And really that is about sharing power and listening and getting out of the way.
Yeah, I love that. Getting out of the way, right? You can still be in their corner cheering them on, but get the heck out of the way.
Yeah.
and let
We create a
them-
lot of barriers
right.
with systems and structures that don't benefit our students. So
Yeah, for sure. Odia, how about you?
You two will have to help me out. Who was the amazing speaker that was talking about the internship on the boat? What was her name? And the captain?
Yeah, she's up on the screen. I believe, was it Michaela? I'll find
Yeah.
her name.
Oh
Yeah,
my,
but this is a
total blank
picture of
on her
her.
name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so-
And it was so awesome to listen to her talk about the relationship she had with her mentor, because her mentor never said no. And it was really fun because she would like come up with some zany idea. Oh, I want to do this. And her mentor's like, okay, well, this is how we have to do it. Like this, you know. But what I loved is the mentor was like, oh yeah, you know, we're going to break the rules, and sort of gave her some tips and tricks to, you know, be seen within, I guess, the way that we've learned to be seen as adults, like, you know, be more assertive, call, like always show up and do these things. And so her mentor would give her all these ideas, and she ended up just going on this path that she'd never anticipated for herself, and blossomed because she went on internship. She sailed for 3 months on this ship. This captain became a mentor of hers. She was doing these things that went against her age, bias about her age, bias about her gender, bias about her race and cultural background. And she was supported all the way through. And she's just this beautiful human being that articulated it all so well. And you couldn't help but feel her infectious love of learning. And so everything that I heard from her is she was seen over and over in these really authentic ways. And the feedback that she got from her mentor was just like, it's okay to be you, and to, you know, to strive for the things that you want. And that's it exactly. You know, she was valued, she was seen. And I just think, wow, imagine what we could do if we could create that relationship with every student, and how powerful that would be for their journey moving on.
right. Yeah, spot on. And I think, yeah, her mentor would just kept answering to anything, like, why not? And soon she developed that same response, like, why not? Why not go for it? And yeah, she did an incredible job telling her story and shared a bunch of pictures, which I always love pictures. And I think too, when I hear this, or was reminded of this quote that I had jotted down from the summit, I was thinking, and even yesterday, there was a new report that came out talking about academic loss, right? Reports from a deficit lens, really, and that, you know, and saying that schools are doubling down on getting those school progress reports up and really cutting out some relationship time in order to do that. So that might be changing in lunch schedules, or maybe cutting out homeroom and trying to implement different interventions to catch kids up on different academics. Now, I'm a firm believer in public education and the importance of public education. And I don't think that this all falls just on educators. I do think, though, that young people hear us when we say that. And if we're focusing on catching them up, they see themselves as being sort of dissolving into this deficit, that something is wrong with them, or that they aren't maybe enough. And so I think we have to be really careful in education spaces, the way that we're talking about that. You know, maybe thinking if we could shift that same mindset, right, into the asset-based lenses, and start measuring, tracking student relationships, that hurt data that they talked about, you know, centering on communication from the students. I know, Jen, you shared, you know, what does it look like to center on student voice, but then really bringing them in to these conversations, bringing in the community, uplifting cultural practices, because we do know that culture is healing for young people. They identify with that, you know, that is part of their identity. And so if we're thinking about that and not just focusing on the deficits that our young people are facing, I think, and yeah, making spaces for fun is really important as well.
Well, I saw the, my Facebook feed was covered with like, oh, test scores and kids are behind. And it always, so having grown up in Saskatchewan, we did not standardize test. And so I always get a little hot under the collar when we focus so much on standardized tests, because I didn't have to standardize tests. And I think I'm a successful adult, and, I was probably not on track. Clearly, because I never took these tests, so I don't know if I was or not. But we focus so much on the product that our kids are and not on who they are as individuals. And so once again, we've, dehumanized them to just be these, these little robots that we need them to get a particular, we need them to check this box for us, and that is to get the test score. And that's so frustrating to me, because we're pulling out all of the good that is public education and just making it all about those scores. And I just get so frustrated about that, because I think, there are kids that are on the edge of deciding whether or not they want to continue with education, and a push to the academics, stripping the art in the lunchroom and the advisory and all of the things that may be the draw for them. This might be the reason that they get out, because they've never been able to connect with anyone beyond those things that aren't deemed academically important.
That's one of the, we're doing some leadership development conferencing today. And of course, it's us and 5 other districts. And we were talking about those news headlines today. And we kind of landed on compared to what, right? Like, what is our comparison of how our students are doing as we've moved through a global pandemic, right? Like, we feel like our students, we can't send the message to them that they don't have the tools to be okay, because they do. And we continue to inundate them with such messaging that like the sky is falling and that it should feel a certain way for them, when many students, I think, have, with their community or their families and their schools, have found ways to be okay, right? And know that there's good and bad days throughout this. And how do we help them understand that help-seeking behaviors are okay, right? Like, if things aren't feeling great, let's talk about it. But also, compared to what? Like, there isn't another time in history that we would have some sort of handbook to live from around a global pandemic, right? And how students and families and communities should be operating and behaving right now, and what those success indicators look like. So I agree with Odia.
To be honest, I'm way more concerned about the emotional, the lack of emotional ability right now, because what I notice is just overall emotional immaturity from adults, from kids, and that's what concerns me. And so that's how relationships and mentoring and all of that we can build on. But right now I'm terrified for the way people are treating one another. And I think if we knew how to talk to each other, we knew how to be, as Native people say, know how to be good relatives to one another, the other stuff would fall into place, right? Like, we wouldn't have to drill, reading, math, or arithmetic, however the saying goes. We wouldn't have to drill that into people, because it would be relational based, and we would be comfortable not being okay knowing something, like you said.
I love that. I'm going to bring that up again to Odia, so I'm going to call on you again. But speaking of, another really a quote that resonated with me was, relational wounds require relational healing. And this was from a leader at Search Institute, which is located here in Minnesota. I mean, they're phenomenal. They have so many resources, which reminds me, at the end, I'll be sharing a bunch of resources, and also in a wraparound, I'll share a bunch of tools with all of you as well. But I really love this, because again, how can we bring humanity back in these spaces? you know, in the workplace and education, how we treat each other as human beings, including our young people, right? But yeah, I'll kind of let you talk a little bit more about that too, Odia, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have the answers, right? Like I just I think we're in such a precipice. Like there's so many things going on. So I was just this morning I was interviewing an elder who does a lot of work here in the Twin Cities. Her name is Hope Flanagan. And we were talking about sadness and depression and how we're picking up the loss of things that are changing. Like, you know, Emily, I know that your family relies a lot on wild ricing, and talking about how the landscape and how the climate is changing and the connections we have to those experiences and what that does to us, and how we don't necessarily, there are some of us who don't understand how deeply the trauma of losing things we've always known around us is impacting us. And she was just talking about like deep emotional wounds that we have, that kids maybe don't even understand that they're carrying. And I thought, wow, like that's this idea of being so in tune with ourselves and being able to reflect on these hurts that we may not fully understand. We just know that we don't feel right. And I think a lot of us are carrying that from the pandemic. Like initially when it started, we were like, we're all going to care for each other and we're going to do grocery deliveries and Zoom calls and Zoom happy hours. But after a while, when we didn't necessarily know what to do, we sort of felt out of control, some of us lost our ability to cope. And our young people were relying on us to be really just to sort of figure this out, right? And as I think about these relational wounds that we have, I think so much of what we need to do is some self-reflection and some self-healing, because we're not really doing anyone any good right now when we're yelling at each other on the internet, or we're comparing, you know, who got the higher test score, or we're engaged in road rage, or we're moving back into these deep consumer filled ways and trying to keep up with the Joneses and all of these things. So I probably didn't answer your question, but these are all the things I'm thinking about, how we're losing sight of ourselves again. We're just filling ourselves up with stuff to feel good. And we're missing those authentic connections, and we're not giving them to our students. We're not giving them to ourselves. And I think we really need to figure out what's important to us. We had a glimpse of it during the pandemic. And we're sliding back into those old ways of just, you know, keeping our head above the water, or, you know, being the duck on the water and then paddling frantically. But we're not solving the problem. We're not connecting with one another in meaningful ways.
Right. And I know Search also shared that they collected some data, and, you know, we're talking about data, but 2 out of 10 young people did not feel, you know, or found only the 2 out of 10 felt seen and heard. So that's 80% of these young people that they collected data on recently. 80% didn't feel that they had been seen or heard at school. So again, allowing those young people to come in and meeting them where they're at, and allowing them to express some of this in, you know, a safe and supportive way. Because I do think that we're like, oh, we are doing this, and there are some places that are doing a great job, but we are really missing a large number of young people by centering on ourselves, right? So I love that how you bring up, we need to do self-reflection, because if we don't keep ourselves in check, how are we going to be there for those young people in a way that they feel that we are actually seeing them, we are actually valuing them? And kind of on the line of, data and different things, I think, at the summit, we also talked about data and how our schools collecting data. What are you collecting data on? And perhaps changing the lens is what in which we evaluate that data and through a relationship lens or a relational lens. And I really like that. Like if you're capturing absenteeism amongst your teachers, we know that a lot of teachers and educators walked away. But looking at that data as why? Why are they walking away? Are they feeling supported? Are they able to build daily relationships with the same students over time? Or are they getting pulled to sub and go do this, go do that? And they're not actually able to really connect with their students. And then again, like even the academic data, are students lacking consistency because they don't have the same teacher coming in and teaching content? Or maybe a teacher that is teaching something about social studies or history, but has a math background. And so the young people that's a disconnect and they're not capturing it. So always looking at it through a relational lens versus just a cut and dry, like kids are behind, right? So kind of always thinking about that relationship piece and over.
I was sitting here chuckling because I remembered the same speaker from Institute saying, you might think you're a good mentor, but that doesn't mean that you're a good mentor. Like people might not think that you are. And so you believing that you're a great mentor doesn't necessitate that you are one. And that really resonated with me because, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like I got this, it's so good. And that's why that self-reflection is so important. And I was just thinking that, I want you all to think about the places where you work. And do you feel like you're being supported in the work that you do? Because I know a lot of people were working in these jobs, we're giving a lot. A lot of school districts are like, oh, yeah, we're all about social emotional learning, but then they don't treat their employees well. And so we're not shown what that healthy relationship looks like. And then we're like, yeah, but you're actually supposed to help the kids do it, but you've never really experienced that at work. And so that's where I see this disconnect is we try to compartmentalize when and how to do relationships rather than make it a daily practice and just be a good person.
Right. And I think too, when we're talking about relationship-centered schools, relationship-centered communities, this isn't something that is going to happen overnight. Like relationships, it takes time. And so this is something that, again, it's a big invitation to get in the game for all of us on a deeper level. And how are we willing to lean into that self-reflection on how we treat each other at work? Because again, when no one's watching, right? Or when we don't think others are watching, young people are watching. And so they're seeing how we treat each other. And there again, it can often reflect on them, and how they're, kind of conceptualizing what it means to be in school, and how they're treating their peers and all those things. But I do think, again, thinking about all of this, and just really taking more time to self-reflect and to hit that pause button, to slow down and think about how, again, it's not all of us doing all these huge, big things. Maybe it's one small step.
I'm not sure who all has permission to speak on this call. Is it just the folks who attended the conference? Okay, because I would like to offer something to the conversation for us to think about. I really respect the conversation around time and the effort that it's going to take to get into a routine of building relationships. And I also want to center the full humanity of children, right? The full humanity, the belief that they're worthy of these kind of relationships is just as important as the time that we say is not there. The time is there. The time is there all day. Every minute of the day is an opportunity to mentor and create a relationship. But do you feel the children in front of you are worthy of that kind of effort? something to think about if you haven't heard of it before. A model that kind of gets into this is a model called conscious discipline, where it not only focuses on the child's behavior, but it does a lot of work on adult behavior too, right? And how we think about children and families and folks in front of us. So what I want to center in this space is that racially, as a black male, I remember being asked, when's the last time you felt a full measure of innocence as a student? And I couldn't think of a time. I couldn't stretch back my memory to a moment where I felt that, right? And so I also want to center race in the conversation and say that it has a big part to do with some of it as well. Do we feel the children in front of us are worthy of this kind of effort? Or that they might be our neighbors or run the businesses or hold the positions that we hold right now someday? Do we feel that all the children in this space are worthy of that kind of a relationship and that kind of investment in terms of time? And so I just think that's an important question, and that needs to be balanced with this idea of we don't always have time to do this because there's a lot going on in the day. And I've been an educator since 1995, so I just want to put it in space that that's something that we need to be thinking about. Shout out to the teacher that said, "These are my babies," but in the same meeting couldn't tell me anything about them. Huh? Right? Was claiming them as hers, all of them, but could not tell me anything about them. I knew more about them and where they come from because I grew up in the same communities and knew the families, but couldn't tell me anything about them, right? So it's are the children worthy of that kind of effort? How are you touching the spirit? What's the intentionality around getting to know them and seeing them as fully human? Sorry if I took too long.
No, and yeah, I appreciate you, Jamal. I'm happy you're on the call today too. Jamal is amazing and often don't get to spend a lot of time um, chatting with you. So I appreciate you. Um, I, you know, we were doing a training a while back, and a piece of it is it's called Connect, Focus, Grow. It's more workforce development, but within it, there's some information from Oprah, and Oprah shared that, having interviewed different folks, very diverse audiences for over 25 years, there was one thing that every single person had in common, and that was that okay? This this human desire to want to feel valuable or valued, and that we, as you said, shared, Jamal, like, are worthy of this space or worthy of this. And I think sometimes there's this assumption, like, of course they know, or of course I know. Get assumptions out of the conversation. Always leave assumptions, you know, way far away because we don't know, right? And again, but really being intentional about that self-reflection and allowing ourselves, our staff, our peers to really do some critical thinking when it comes to our biases. And again, how are we treating each other, and how are we really treating our young people that we're working with?
Jamal, you brought up some really interesting points for me. So at the summit, I really talked about, typically schools, elementary schools at least, predominantly dominant culture, women who teach. And in my work in Indian education, oftentimes I will see folks collect problem kids and try and be their person as a way to almost build up their own self-esteem. And we jokingly call them Great White Hope, just so you know, they think they're the Great White Hope. And so I really struggled with, how do we help educators who maybe don't understand how this white benevolence is impacting kids, right? Like they feel collected or picked over, or however it is, from the white adults in the room that don't really look at them wholly for who they are, but more see them as a tool to put on the resume for, oh, I've worked with at-risk students, or, I've worked in Title I schools, or I know culturally relevant pedagogy because I've worked with these students. And they miss the point of generating a relationship and instead look at these students as a resume builder. So you have me thinking about that, and I appreciate that, because that's something I've wrestled with a lot about how to tackle that head on.
Yeah, absolutely. That sort of the white saviorism mentality between those spaces. And so, yeah, and last night, I know we're only at like about 15 minutes, but there was one more too. And, I think this is just really good conversation. And that's really what I hope the quotes did, rather than giving you too many lists of different things. But another good one was getting young people, what this is. What is relationship-centered schools? And it's really getting young people what they need, when they need it, and the way they need it. And again, I think that's talking about different cultures, different backgrounds, different coming, we're meeting young people where they're at. And again, that intersectionality that they have. And again, but I think, how do we do that? Ask the young people, what do you need? How do you need it? I think it's just sort of this, like, here's the problem. Okay, so the adults want to get together and we're going to fix this, right? It's not about fixing. It's about uplifting those young people to be those leaders. They are brilliant. Working with middle school kids, often they got just a bad rep all the time, but they were the most probably tangled. There's just a lot going on with middle school students, but they were really the best problem solvers. I mean, they could have solved all kinds of problems if they were just given the space to do it. Yeah, I just, but I see Jen's wheels turning too. I don't know.
But isn't there a time too, like when you just make decisions for the child with their best interests in mind, right? I put in the chat, my fifth grade teacher, and he, I call him that because when I was that young, he would always make sure I was reading something while I was always hungry as a kid on welfare, coming through some rough stuff to get to school. I had this teacher who just would keep food at his desk that I could eat, but also made sure that I always had a book to read. Always. I was always reading, even books I didn't really want to read, Alice in Wonderland or stuff like, I always had a book, right? I just talked to him just a few days ago. He's retired and lives in Hawaii. And he still calls to check on me just to say, hey, man, what are you up to? What are you doing these days? And I know he's mentally going through some things right now, but just a great example of a relationship that started in elementary school, and he followed me through my career, like, and just called me random and just, hey, what are you doing? Right? So cool, and I'm thinking if we can all do that kind of stuff, whoa.
Right? Again, not, a lot of times you never know which pebble will make the biggest ripple. And so not feeling helpless and hopeless in this space, rather digging in. And you don't have to stay in this car for this road trip, but I hope that this isn't going to be the last space that this conversation comes across your life. I hope that we can continue to talk about these spaces and how can we continue to connect our circles of supporting each other, because it is hard. The world wants to eat you up, so you can only imagine how young people feel. And so how can we again continue to just work together and support each other? And again, if that's in your workspace, if you're an educator in those spaces as well. I think it's so important. And again, being mindful of time, I am going to share a lot of this in the chat, but I'll also send it in email. You can always save the chat if you click those 3 little dots next to the smiley face in the chat. If you didn't know that, it's a little tool, you can save it and then it captures everything that's in there. But again, just some three things that I just pulled that maybe might be things to think about that you can maybe begin to, as you're critically reflecting on some of this work or how might you do it, but really center on the well-being, right? That's that, how can we bring human back into everything that we do? Prioritizing and creating a school culture that's holistically really embedded in everything. And it's an essential, seeing it as an essential piece of education, not just to add on or one more thing to do, but this is essential. It is a core piece of it, and that's that relationships. The next one is building community with all in that space. So if that's your teachers, how are we best supporting our teachers? How are we best supporting our support staff? Cafeteria, bus drivers, all of them. How are we inviting community into our spaces? Are we inviting them in? Are we inviting in cultural leaders, elders, bringing them in to share some of their wisdom and knowledge? And again, bringing in those young people. And then again, making them feel that, and really, really making sure that they feel included and that they are a part of this conversation. And again, embedding that mentoring mindset of, you know, within everything that you do, thinking about the intentionality of the work that you're doing, thinking about, you know, that supportive piece, developmental piece, and the communal piece. Again, that community approach. So whether you're an educator, educational partner, if you're an advocate on the call or watching this later, if you're a funder, get involved, right? Maybe there's a way that you can help fund a liaison person to build out programming within different educational spaces, or provide some training if it's, you know, culturally relevant training or whatever it might be. But funders, again, they are a big part of this as well. And even if you're a program leader, how can you begin to ensure that you are supporting and monitoring those matches that you have? And again, I shared this earlier, but lastly, just really thinking about this, if you don't take anything else away, but hopefully you could, is nothing about us without us. Marcus from California is always sharing this. And I'll just share really quickly that Marcus shared at the summit as well. And he's always telling bits of his story, but he was a principal at one of, at a school that worked with a little bit older students, so middle school, high school age, and their behavior referrals were through the roof. We're talking thousands of behavioral referrals in a year. And Marcus stepped into this and decided, like, we can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So for the first 2 weeks of that school year, he wiped out curriculum, took it out, no academics. The only thing that those educators, students, community members, parents, all of them were invited in, and they created for 2 weeks relationship building. They were building relationships with each other, with community members, and they ate a lot of food, had a lot of great conversation. And by the end of that, after again got pushback from the school board and really a lot of the superintendent, but in doing that, they ended that year with only a handful of behavior referrals. So the impact of relationship building is really critical and crucial in these spaces. I had shared a few pictures of all of us. So again, connection, it's important to me. That's why I wanted to invite as many people as I could. I hope next year we can double that and invite even more people to spaces to have these conversations. And hopefully all of you will stay connected. And again, even stay connected with Mentor Minnesota. And so if you're in a developmental stage, maybe that's like, you don't even know where to start with all of this, please reach out. I'm happy to maybe just start the conversation. Or if you're working on relationship centered schools and you want to continue to build in some other different modalities of running this out, still reach out. We would love to stay in touch and to support you along the way so that it's not so daunting or overwhelming. Rather, we just want to ensure that you feel supported. I'm going to skip over that. It was just a quick video, but I'll share with all of you. Oh, I guess we do have a minute. I think it's important. Let's watch.
I have been very, very lucky to have had so many people in my life that I could consider a mentor and who have taught me how to be strong and to bushwhack through all the hard crap in life. But the one that sticks out to me is my elementary school counselor or therapist, Jenny. I had her when everything in my life was just completely falling apart and was just completely crazy, and I could talk to her about anything. And when she retired, she gave me a book. She'd been helping me work through stress issues, and she gave me a book and she wrote in it and she said, "Never forget who you are, because who you are is great." And I'll always remember that.
I love that. And I don't live in tears at all. So if I ever get emotional, but it's so true. And maybe like you shared, Jamal, like all those books, whether it was Alice in Wonderland or all those things, right? Those adults were opening up doors and windows for you to dream, to use your imagination. So I hope that we as adults don't lose that. As we do this work together too, I really hope that we don't lose sight of that imagination, that fun. And we can be here to remind each other of that. But I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes too, if other folks had questions or wanted to share. If not, I just really appreciate all of you. I know that hour goes fast. I should have maybe done a 2-hour or hour and a half. But again, I'll be sharing a whole bunch of resources with all of you as well.